I first became aware of your teachings when I was living in London, and a friend of mine gave me a book. She worked in a bookstore, the famous Watkins bookstore in London, the oldest metaphysical bookstore in the world, and she gave me a novel, and the author was Wayne Dyer. It was in the 80s, and it was a novel about a woman from outer space who came to the planet to give spiritual teachings.
Right. Her name was Icus. It was actually, my daughter was born that year, and it was her name spelled backwards, Sky, E-Y-K-I-S. And it was about someone who visited another world where it was exact duplicate of Earth, except that the people there were neurotic like we are here, except they were neurotic there because there was a reason to be. When this visitor first checked into the hotel, he turned on the television set and someone gave the news, and then they gave the weather, and they gave the sports, and then they gave the anxiety attack report. The likelihood of anxiety attacking over the weekend, it was coming in high, it was coming in fast over the mountains. You want to get out your Xanax and your no pain and your tranquilizers because it's going to be heavy doses of anxiety, because here on Uranus, which is the title of the place that they went, anxiety really attacks. And Icus comes to Earth, and she's looking at all these people saying they're having anxiety attacks, but there's no anxiety and it doesn't attack. The original title of that book was going to be called "If You Want to Be Happy, Get Your Head Out of Uranus." But it turned out to be a little bit more serious, and we're actually we're making a movie of that book. It's the only fiction thing I've ever undertaken.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Reminds me a little bit of Aldous Huxley wrote a novel called Island, which is about a fictitious island. Somebody gets shipwrecked on this island, where he begins to realize the natives live consciously and in awareness. And even the parrots in the trees have been trained to remind people to be conscious, so they say things like, "Attention, attention," meaning be present, be there. One could say, be there as the witnessing presence of your mind. So if you haven't read it yet, you might enjoy that. And is your book still available?
It is.
No?
It's still in print. Everything I've done is still in print. It's amazing. Yes, it's called Gifts from Icus.
Yeah.
But what you're saying reminds me of, do you know who Mary Oliver is? She's a well-known poet. She wrote a poem I used to recite in my talks called Wild Geese. And she was asked, what's the secret to living an enlightened life? And she said, it just boils down to, and it reminds me of what you just said, pay attention, be astonished, and tell other people. She said that's all you need for a successful life. And I think about paying attention
is the key.
It is. It's a big part of what you do, I know.
Yes. And that's, of course, I've told that story quite a few times in the past, but not for a few years, so maybe I can say it. It's about a Zen teacher who actually lived, I don't know when, 100 years ago, in Japan, and his only teaching, whenever he was asked to explain the meaning of Zen, his only answer would be to raise his index finger and look at you. That's the meaning of Zen. What it points to, of course, is the state of presence, the alert presence. That is the whole teaching. Of course, Zen is, many people who are drawn to Zen try to understand it conceptually, and they just don't get it.
Right.
I know there are Zen monks who just don't get it because there's nothing to understand conceptually. It's entering the state of consciousness of presence. So it's frustrating. So Zen developed methods to frustrate the mind even more so that it finally gives up its attempt to understand or to know conceptually.
Right.
And that's really, that is not just Zen, that is really the essence. Even Course in Miracles says, your understanding is not a powerful contribution to the truth.
So true.
And the paradox is that out of that state of presence, very often, if there's really something you need to know, it arises.
Right. Yeah, someone sent me a T-shirt that I gave to my son. It says, don't just do something, stand there. And it was like the Zen master. Yeah.
And that brings us to an interesting topic, and that is being and doing. To be to reconcile within oneself the two dimensions, because here as human beings we are called upon to take action and to also create, as the universe loves to create new forms, billions, trillions of life forms. We are part of this love of the universe to create form. And I know that because I have observed myself, and you know it because you know yourself. The universe also wants to know its own essence through you, the source. It wants the conscious realization of the source. And in human beings, that's expressed as the draw towards to be totally content with what is, to be totally at peace in the present moment, to long for that state of absolute, beautiful, deep peace. And I call that, in a minute, I'd like your input. I call that it's the outgoing movement of the universe is wanting to create, and the return movement of the universe is wanting to know itself, and it through the human as in its essence. So the universe wants, there's a two, so perhaps everybody here can also feel that within. Yes, you want to do things, but you also want to be. So not to lose being while you do, and not lose yourself in the doing, get stressed, getting the fruit of the action, Bhagavad Gita, not to always look to the next thing to attain, so that remain rooted in being, and then act from there, from that rootedness, not out of egoic need to have, but out of the inner fullness. And I'm sure you have a lot to contribute here too.
I think of Moby Dick, one of my favorite novels, and the author speaks of, in these words, this great writing always intrigues me, and I memorized it when I was in high school. He said, for us, as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all of the horrors of the half-lived life, the half-lived life. And when you speak about being and doing, I think one of the major problems, Eckhart, for our world and for us is that we really aren't raised to believe in our extraordinariness. about how extraordinarily, how divine we are, how, that we're all not just pieces of God, but that we are all God. We are all part of God. And that's something we carry around with us. And this ordinary part of us, the part of us that is, called the ego, the part of us that believes that who we are is what we accumulate and what we accomplish and what other people think of us, and the part of us that is separate from everyone else, and the part of us that feels like we have to own things and so on, and that we're born into this world of where there's nothing to do. There's like when a baby's inside a mother's womb, what does she have to do? What does the baby have to do? In the Tao says, the Tao does nothing, and it leaves nothing undone. It's become my son's favorite mantra, because I say, Sense, come on, do something, let's go. He'll say, I do nothing. And I leave nothing undone. So, but this part of it, so we're sort of snatched out of that perfection and programmed into a life of accumulating and achieving, and we start to believe that this is who we are. And we never get to the part of us that is extraordinary, because the ordinary part of us feels that we're having a successful life if we go through the motions, if we go through school, if we get good grades, if we get into the right school, if we meet the right person, if we fill out the forms, if we pay our taxes, if we don't get arrested, if we follow the rules. This is like this is an ordinary life. And I speak to an extraordinary life, and I have so much respect for the work that you have done over the years. But the extraordinary part of us still has ordinary in it. I mean, we still have to follow the rules, most of them, and we still have to fill out the forms. And I'm sure you pay your taxes, right? And and so you can be an extraordinary being, but you still have ordinariness in it. But beyond ordinary is this, is what we call the soul, because we just don't have another name for it, And in the Tao Te Ching, the opening lines of the Tao say, the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. So you're stuck already. You can't even call it anything because it goes into two-ness. Now it is what it is and the name that you call it. But the extraordinary part of who we all are is the soul. It's that invisibleness that's formless, that has no boundaries, it has no beginnings, it's birthless, it's changeless, it's deathless. And this part of us doesn't care about winning, it doesn't care about owning, it doesn't care about happiness, it doesn't care about being better than anyone else. It just wants to expand. It wants to grow. It's miserable. The soul is miserable when you contain it, when you put a fence around it, when you put a label on it, when you tell it what it can be and what it can't be. All of us have this extraordinariness called the soul, which is infinite. Because if it wasn't infinite, it would be finite. And if it was finite, you'd be able to find the end of it or the beginning of it. So because it's not finite, it's infinite, this means that what does infinity mean? It's just always expanding. It's just, there's no end to it. There's no end to it. This is the part that we need to address, I think, within ourselves, is this infinite part of us that doesn't need to fit in, doesn't need to be right, doesn't need to be better than anybody else. It just wants to expand and grow and not be told, this is what you can do, this is what your limits are, this is what's not possible for you. And I've always, I don't know about you, but always, my entire life have just been intrigued by extraordinary people, by extraordinary events, by people who can do things. As soon as I see someone can levitate, I was like, I want to know all about that. How do you go about this? Someone who can, Carolyn Mace talks about defying gravity, or Joel Goldsmith says that in the presence of the God realized, the laws of the physical world do not apply. Can you make electronic equipment stop with your consciousness and so on? And those kinds of things, those extraordinary accomplishments. I just read a book that just blew me away. I don't know if you've read this, called Unbroken by Laura Hillerbrand. Have any of you read that? Unbroken? It's one of the great reads you'll ever read in your life, and it's the story of a man who survived impossible things, and he's now 94 years old, and he was shot down during World War II, and he cruised on a raft across the Pacific Ocean. Every word of it is true, but the extraordinariness of this being and what he accomplished and how he survived, those things. I just think that we need to address ourselves, people like us who have a big audience, to creating a world of extraordinary people who look beyond what they were programmed to become, ordinary, filling out the forms and so on, to those where we can expand and really change the world. This kind of thing can really, truly impact the entire consciousness of this planet. I really think it can happen.
Yes. And the basis for that, so in a way, we are talking about creating, and earlier you mentioned that part within everyone, the essence that is timeless and infinite, and that's the being. And so conscious union with that can then lead to awakened, as I call it, awakened doing. So if we go back for a moment to the being part, as Wayne was speaking and as I am speaking, pointing towards that dimension within you, the question is whether at this very moment, so that it's not another belief in your mind. I mean, it's comforting to believe I am an infinite being, but that's a belief. And then can you sense the reality of that? And as we sit here, can we sense the reality of that within ourselves, where you are no longer deriving your sense of identity or your sense of who you are from ideas in your head? That's the start. Because in the normal consciousness, which is unconsciousness, who you feel you are, which of course is the limited self, the conditioned self, the time-bound self, what the Buddha called the self, the delusion, what Jesus pointed to when he said, deny thyself, as one of the essential points of his teaching. Deny thyself, been misinterpreted by the churches as if you had to say, oh, miserable me. That's not it at all. Deny thyself is recognize the unreality of that self, of that basing your sense of who you are on what ideas you hold in your head, thoughts, in other words, that tell you about your story, about who you are, and never feeling really fulfilled. It's always not quite sufficient, so you need to defend this mental edifice of who you are, and so on. You need to add to it. Maybe then I'll be fully myself when I achieve that. So at this moment, can you sense that within you there is an unconditioned, timeless consciousness which has nothing to do with thinking, which is prior to all thinking, which is, you cannot make it into an object and say, there it is, because it's the eternal subject, it's the I, the one I, it's spacious presence. I'm just using different pointers because different pointers work for different people. It's spacious presence. It's a sense of deep aliveness that has nothing to do with your history whatsoever, and nothing to do with your future whatsoever. So if you can touch that within you, that is the liberation from the false sense of self. And once you can sense that, it's exhilarating to feel that which transcends the limited self in you, that presence that cannot be conceptualized, that cannot be named, the Tao. This is why we're here, to experience
Exactly.
that.
The great saint in India named Muktananda was asked the question, what is real? And he said, that is real, which never changes. Period. So now you try to define yourself using that definition. Like the question Eckhart is addressing here is, who am I? And the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I'm this body, But how many bodies have you been in since you incarnated just this time? How many bodies have you shown up in? You were in one this big, you were in a little toddler body, you were in one that stands like this, like all my teenage daughters do, and roll their eyes. I was in a 20-year-old body, and I just saw a picture of it. I just did a new public television special, and I saw that picture floating across. And when I was in that body, I really believed it was real. But it's been 50 years, and I can't find it. I don't know where it is. Like there's nothing in this body. There's not one cell left over in this body that was in that body. And that's true for every single person watching and every single person in this room. So that who you are is that which keeps occupying new bodies on a regular basis. In fact, if Deepak were up here with us, he would say that the body you came into watch this presentation with will be very different than the one that you will leave here with. Now, we can't see the changes going on in that place, but we're in a world. So if everything that is changing isn't real, who we really are, there's a higher self within each and every one of us, or a highest self. And a higher self, to me, one of my teachings was that the Creator puts a spark of Himself into each and every creation. So there's a spark of God in each and every one of us. But my experience, especially lately in my own life, has been that that spark can grow from a spark to a fragment to a segment to something bigger. It can get as big as a soccer ball. It can get bigger and bigger inside of you until you ultimately reach another conclusion, that the same conclusion that Jesus came to when he was about to be stoned because he blasphemed. He said, "Why would you stone me?" And they said to him that we stone you because you are a man and you claim to be God. And he said, "Is it not written in your laws that I have said, you are gods? You are gods." This comes right out of the mouth of Jesus. And St. Paul, writing in Philippians, in his letters to the Philippians, says, "Have in you the same mind as Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God." But we've taken this idea of this place that you're speaking of, this perfect infinite presence, this place of divine peace, and interpreted the words "I am God" or "you are God" to be the God that we've created in our own images. This God who's angry, and this God who has the power to heal, but restricts it to some and gives it to others. This God that demands payment and fancy, buildings and gold embroidered costumes and so on, and created a God like that. When in fact, again, out of the scriptures, Jesus said, when asked who is God, he said, God is love. I mean, I don't know, is there a better word for it than that?
Yes. And of course, the impermanence and the changing body or inhabiting different bodies, the same applies to the psychological, because the body is the physical form, and then that's the starting point for most people's sense of identity. That's I am this external appearance and so on. The next place that people use to define their identity through, of course, is the psychological self-image, which is also changing, which consists of the stream of thinking accompanied by certain emotions, that continuously happen, that also changes from year to year, who you consider yourself to be, the psychological self. So we have the double delusory identifications. One is with the physical vehicle, and then there is the identification with the mental emotional vehicle also, which is not who you are, which also is part of the continuous flux of forms. And to recognize that is already, when you recognize that, it's a kind of relief in a way. If you really consider the fact of the impermanence of the physical form and the impermanence of the psychological form, you say, wow, it's to the ego, which really ego is the identification with that gives you a sense of self, that's the ego. So to the ego, that's bad news. It says, oh, that's terrible. Everything is impermanent. I don't want to hear that. Says the ego, that's dreadful. It's depressing. Don't talk to me about death, depressing. But there's something else in you that actually feels alive suddenly and exhilarated when you hear the fact of impermanence. And suddenly something awakens in you that is not part of the impermanence, that which does not change. And that we could call it this or that, but it's never quite right. I sometimes call it pure consciousness, the unconditioned consciousness, the formless consciousness. Thought is consciousness having been born into a form. The physical body is consciousness having been born into a temporary physical vehicle. So consciousness assumes form continuously, and that's the deeper meaning of reincarnation. One could say, every time I get caught up in a thought that arises in my head, and by caught up I mean identified with the thought has me in its power, every time that happens, I reincarnate into form, into the thought form. So you reincarnate into physical bodies, but you also reincarnate into the mind continuously, because you identify with the mind. So to stop the cycle of reincarnation, which is what the Buddhists are trying to do, but they have a kind of traditional idea of it, but the more immediate thing you can do is to don't believe in every thought that arises in your head. So you don't get caught up in every thought that arises, and you realize there is a dimension in you that is an aware presence from where you can look at a thought and see it come and go, and you can see it's negative, it has a certain vibrational quality to it, which may be high or low. And so you touch the place where you are not the physical body, where you are not the thoughts and emotions, although these are there, where you are that spacious presence, the awareness for that. That's the eternal I. And that's the light of the world. That's Jesus again, you quoted Jesus. Jesus said two things. He said, I am the light of the world. And then somewhere else he said, you are the light of the world. Both.
Right. That word I am is very big in my consciousness and in my awareness. I've just written a whole book that will be out in the spring on this whole idea of I am. It's the only place in all the scriptures in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, in Exodus, there's Moses out there floating on a basket in the Nile, and he gets picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter and is raised as the grandson of the Pharaoh, who had ordered all male children to be drowned and so on. And then he escapes after committing a murder when he was 17 or 18 years old and defending someone that was being persecuted, one of the Israelites. Moves out to the Sinai and is out walking one day 40 years later after he married and children, and he's a shepherd, and all of a sudden he encounters a burning bush. And this is a bush that doesn't doesn't get consumed, it just keeps burning, and a voice comes from the burning bush and says to Moses, it calls out name, Moses, Moses. Now this is 1,300 years before the birth of Christ. That's 13 centuries. That's 800 years before Lao Tzu. So this is one of our most ancient texts and stories, and it's the only place where God's name is given. And God yells out Moses, and the first words that Moses says to God are, "Here I am." And then he starts telling Moses this weird story. You're going to go out and you're going to free all of your people. I'm going to send you to the promised land. You're going to free them all. And he said, who am I? Who am I to do this? He said, well, I will be with you, it says in Exodus. And finally, but he said, what is your name? He said, what am I going to say to these people? And he said, my name is, I am that I am. And that shall be my name for all future generations. That is my name. So the name I am is really the name of God. And you have to ask yourself the question, every time you use it, you know, in the book of Joel it says, let the weak say, I am strong. How do you declare your I ams? Because most of your I ams are associated with your ordinariness, with your physical world, with your mind that you're speaking about. But when you begin to say, you know, I am well, which I say to myself, and I've had a diagnosis that tells me I'm not supposed to be able to say that, but I know the greatest gift I've ever been given is the gift of my imagination, the gift of being able to place anything in there and put a do not disturb sign around it and super glue my intentions to that inner place. And you mentioned the words Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth. He also said, I am the resurrection. He didn't say I am the crucifixion. And we've placed so much emphasis on that in the world, on the suffering, and not enough, I think, on this being who is transcended and is that being of light. But I ask every one of you watching, every one of you in here to be very careful when you use the words I am, because you say I am weak. When Moses said, what is your name? God didn't say, my name is I hope things work out, you know, or my name is I will be. Because to say I will be means I am not. He said, I am that I am, meaning everything that exists, I am that I am, which means you. And you can use the name, I am. And one of the things, Eckhart, you and I talked about in preparation for doing this is not only to look at it from sort of a academic, philosophical point of view, but how can we apply what our teachings really bring to the world? Because this world we're in right now, I mean, it needs what we're speaking about here in a big way. It needs an I am God in the sense of I am love as what we walk around with in our peace and in our quiet, because this is the first time in the history of this country that a child born today's life expectancy is less than its parents'. It's never happened before. And its expectancy for earning what it can earn is seriously diminished from what its parents were. And we have, we have a nation of addicts. I mean, not just to illegal drugs and so on, but to just prescriptions. You know, people, I mean, in the year, this will shock you, in the year 1970, there were 2 billion prescription tablets prescribed in America. 2 billion individual tablets, 1970. In 2007, one generation later, that number is 113 billion. In one generation. I mean, who doesn't have 4 or 5 or 6 prescription drugs that they're taking? And I mean, my daughter just lost her best friend's fiance to an overdose of these prescription drugs, these painkillers that people are taking. Antipsychotic drugs, I mean, we're loaded with them. Not only that, but I mean, our food supply has been contaminated. I mean, it's like we have 31% of young people obese. what is going on? I mean, that's a lack of consciousness. Genetically modified organisms put into our foods, and violence. Last year in the city of Chicago, 242 students were shot to death in one city, in one school system. It's like just a few days ago in Nevada, somebody walked in with a Uzi or an AK-47 and blew away 7 or 8 people in Carson City. I want the people who are voting to end the sale of these massive weapons that are so capable of killing people to stand up and be counted. I mean, violence, contamination, addictions. We get enough people thinking that I am God and I am love and projecting it. I mean, one of the things I got from watching what you did with Oprah is the awareness that when we reach elevated levels of consciousness that you're speaking about, when we are totally here, now, present, that we don't just affect ourselves, but we literally affect those around us, right? I mean, is that what you're teaching? I mean,
yes.
That was very impactful to me, that it's important for me to pay attention and to be astonished, because not just because I'll feel better and I'll have a nice conversation like this, but because the next person that I encounter will be impacted by that, and the next, and enough of us, the number of people in here, the number of people watching. I mean, I think it's what we're called to do, Eckhart. I think that's why we have a voice. I really do.
It's on the people you come into contact with, your state of consciousness or your state of unconsciousness also transmits itself. So one negative person can create a chain reaction of negativity in many others, and in the same way, a conscious person can dissolve streams of negativity. The buck stops here. If you're conscious and non-reactive, the stream stops. It dissolves in the presence that you are. And so not only do you affect those you come into contact with, you affect the collective, the underlying collective field of human consciousness. So I feel sure that you affect countless others you never even meet, because all human consciousness is connected. The consciousness of every individual human at a deeper level is part of the collective consciousness of humanity.
And it's beyond people too, though, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I was with Christiane Northrup. Do you know Dr. Northrup? Just in Pasadena, we were giving a talk together, and she was so excited just before she was going on to speak. She said, I just saw this incredible piece of research. She said that when you have a garden and you plant vegetables in the garden for you to eat, that whatever it is that you need in terms of what is missing in your life, whether it's a vitamin deficiency or whether it's your immune system deficiency or if you've got cancer or whatever it is, those plants that are nurtured by you will provide just for you what you need when you eat them, not for the person next door. I mean, that's an amazing piece of research. So it isn't just human consciousness. I think it's like there's a symbiotic kind of thing, and it's like there's some people, like when you walk into a room, you just know. I mean, I walked into a room once with Mother Teresa many years ago, and it's like everything changed. The room was in a different state. Patanjali had these wonderful words. He said, when you're steadfast, that means you never slip. When you're steadfast in your abstention of thoughts of harm directed towards yourself and others, that all living creatures will cease to feel fear in your presence. I mean, we can impact the whole sphere, the whole universe, I think, can be impacted if we just begin to recognize that we are God. We are God. T.S. Eliot had that wonderful note. He said, we shall not cease from exploration, but at the end of all of our exploring will be to return to the place from which we originated and to know it for the first time.
Yes.
I don't think you have to die.
No.
for that. I think he was speaking about death, but I don't think we are. Certainly I'm not, and I don't think you are either.
No, that's also the same truth is in the parable in that Jesus tells of what's traditionally called the prodigal son, which actually is a very ancient parable. In different traditions it's used. You all probably know it. The son is the son of a rich father, and he goes out, he says to the father, "Give me your inheritance," and he travels to some distant land and squanders his inheritance. He becomes a beggar. In other versions of it, he even forgets who he is. He forgets that he is the son of that father. So he sits there by the roadside begging, and then the father sends messengers to him, sends out messengers to the distant country, and they find the son, and they say, "Do you know who you are?" And he says, "No." And then he begins to remember, and then he returns to the father's house, and that's what I mentioned earlier, the return movement. And then when he returns, it says the father loves him more deeply than before. And to me that means this is the story of humanity. Humanity losing itself in externals, losing connectedness with the source of all being, with the one. Not absolutely losing it, but total unawareness of it. And so we become beggars, and this is the condition of most humans who are not yet going through the spiritual awakening, which in other words is not really your condition anymore, but it's still the majority of people on the planet who are not connected consciously with the source within themselves. So they are looking for scraps for fulfillment. And scraps is anything, from the house to the car to this or that. Give me a new partner. There's anything to give me fulfillment, to tell me who I am. So they're seeking it there and there. That's the condition of the person who has lost awareness of the source. And then perhaps what the meaning of the messengers is in the parable is perhaps a spiritual teacher or spiritual teaching that somehow you come into contact with, or the messenger could be, as I see it, could also be just the suffering becomes so much that the pressure of it awakens you, and then you begin to realize who you are, and you return then. That means you suddenly become aware again of that deep connectedness with being, your essential oneness with being. And the meaning of what the parable says, that is loved more deeply by the Father, I interpret that as meaning that when you regain awareness of being, which perhaps humans had a long, long time ago in the distant past, and that could be the reason for all the myths in many, many cultures of the golden age. Right. In many cultures on the planet, you have different versions of the myth of there was once a golden age when people lived in happiness, and that perhaps points to our original connectedness with Source. Then we lost it. This was our up to very recently, and now returning to the home, the Father's home, means to regain that awareness, but at a deeper level, because whereas before it was in your natural state, you may know from your own life when you have lost something and then you come back to it, you appreciate it much more deeply. This applies, for example, to our awareness of nature. In the past, we lived in natural connectedness with nature and respecting nature. It was so natural, we didn't know we lived in natural connectedness with nature because nature was all there was. Then we lost it. We created a world that is almost hostile towards nature. It's one of the absurdities or dysfunctions of our condition. Right. And now there is an enormous awareness in many humans towards the sacredness of the natural world. We really know it. We know it more deeply now than before. So also when we go to the source, return to the awareness of that, there is an added dimension there that wasn't there when we lived thousands and thousands of years ago in natural connectedness. Now there is a conscious connectedness with source, and that's the next level in human evolution.
I think it is, and I don't think it's an accident that people like yourself and myself have an audience for that return to source. You know, I mean, I just did a public television special, public television, and it's basically, the theme of it is, it's called Wishes Fulfilled, but the theme of it is the God is in every single one of us, and that they approved it really surprised me. But because they're always so careful about separating out, and you can't say you are God, and you know that you are divine and all of that, because somebody might get upset about it, and it just seems to be a new way. But I'm thinking, Eckhart, as you were speaking, when you're talking about the prodigal son, that it's really, I don't know if it's your story, but it is mine. And I have gotten lost on several occasions in my life. I spent a lot of years in an orphanage. I spent years struggling through addictions. I've spent years dealing with separation and divorce and the pain of that. And now leukemia. And each one of these has been almost a way for me to recognize that all spiritual advances are preceded by a fall of some kind or another. My friend Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, passed away a few years ago, used to say that if you shield the mountain from the windstorms, you'll never see the beauty of the carvings. And the storms of our life, and the storms of my life, and particularly this recent one, we had talked about this earlier, about this leukemia, has brought me to just, it's brought me back to, you're calling it source, I'm calling it God. It doesn't matter, we could call it Irene, it doesn't make any difference what we call it, because the Tao that can be named is not the Tao anyway. But what came into my life at this time, in the last couple of years with this, are just very significant people who have showed up in my life. Healing experience that I had with John of God down in Brazil, that was done remotely from Brazil to Maui. And I was told, I mean, I had someone come here to Maui, a physician. Her name is Dr. Reina Piscova. She's an eye surgeon in California. She wanted me to go down there because she'd heard I'd had leukemia. I couldn't go, or I didn't go. And she made all kinds of extra special arrangements for me to have photos taken, and all dressed in white, drinking certain kind of liquids, and having herbs that I was taking. And you know, I had a healthy level of skepticism around, you know, this kind of thing, as I'm sure many of you do as well. But I urge you to, like Tolle said, have a mind that's open to everything and attached to nothing. Like, just open your mind up to this, because from here, the night, it was the 21st of April this year, my mother's 95th birthday. And I had surgery at 7 o'clock in the morning from Brazil to Maui. I don't know how this gets done. And then a week later, I stayed in bed for a whole week. I could hardly even walk. I was so the day after the surgery, I got up, and Reina had called me. She said, "Now, you've had surgery." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, you can't swim, and you can't do yoga, and you can't walk, and you can't do these kind of things." And I said, "I'm going for a walk." And I got 100 yards from my place, and I collapsed and had to be helped back, and I was in bed for a week. And when they removed the sutures, which are invisible sutures, which don't exist even, from that moment on, Eckhart, something happened to me that was so, it just when Mary Oliver said, "Be astonished," and Rumi said, "Sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment," I've been in a state of bewilderment since that time. I had my 71st birthday just a few weeks after that, and all I wanted to do was give things away. I was filming in San Francisco at the St. Francis Hotel, and I took a wad of $50 bills and $100 bills and just to all the homeless people that I could find. I would talk to them, and it was the most, and I was sobbing through this whole thing. It was like I became a basket case of love. And it's been half a year or more, and everyone I encounter and everything I see, everything just looks different. And it's like a return to an awareness that, I mean, I am well. I am perfect health. I don't go to doctors now. I don't have my numbers checked. I gave up yoga for a year after they told me I couldn't do hot yoga, and I believed them, and my body started getting tired, and I couldn't do it. And then one morning I was just told, you can go do yoga. You don't have to avoid any of that. You're perfectly well. And then I met John of God in September up at Omega, where we first met. Just a few months ago, and I walked amongst, there was 1,500 people a day walking past him, and I was just put in there. He had no idea who I was from anybody else. They didn't tell them how special I am, you know. I mean, neglected to tell that, and he looked at me and he just smiled, and in Portuguese he just said, "You are well." He said, "Please sit here and observe my interventions for the next 3 days," which is what I did. And it's just been love, Eckhart. It's just been love, love, love. I mean, it's almost like God entered, somehow they put a God consciousness in me that I thought I had because I'd been writing about it. And the old ego, I mean, it's always there. I don't know if you know this. I don't even know if I want to mention this, but I'm going to do it, obviously. You know, there's a list out on the internet of the 100 most spiritually influential people alive. Have you seen this list?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have. Yeah. You and I are going to have a talk here. So they have the 100 from the top to the bottom, and this is where the ego and the spirit are just it's just such an interesting thing. Because you're listening right now to the third most spiritually influential person alive. That's me. And that's my ego. Isn't that great? Thank you. And there's 2 people ahead of me on this list. Now my spirit says, you're not any better than anybody else. You're just connected to God like everyone else. Why would you even think that? And then the ego just is tapping me on the shoulder and said, I know you can take those 2 guys ahead of you down. So the number 2 spiritually influential person alive, according to Watkins, this list, is the Dalai Lama. And the number 1 spiritually I can't even say it, spiritually influential person alive is Eckhart Tolle. So now I don't know whether we should get together and go after the Dalai Lama and then maybe we can arm wrestle. But it's that funny thing, it's all the time, because I use it on my kids all the time, you know. I even said to my ex-wife, you know, in your wildest dreams, could you ever imagine that you were married to the 3rd most spiritually influential person alive? She said, they didn't call me. And she said, I don't know how to break it to you, but you're not in my wildest dreams. But I think that's interesting that you, and I just found out about that list. The day I found out about that list, I got a call from Eckhart Tolle saying, would you like to, we're going to come to Maui, we'd like to do a conference together. And I thought, this is my chance, I'm going. I love you, man, I love you.
This is, the concepts like that come floating into your mind. I saw it also. Somebody sent me this list. these concepts have to be, when they come in, they have to be dropped like hot potatoes, because if you hang on to it, that moment, the spirit gets obscured. If you think you are somebody who is somebody, immediately that would be the denial of the reality of it. So the art really is and it's tricky because I've seen it happen to other spiritual teachers, some were able to drop the hot potato when people came with beliefs and projections about them. And I've seen others who took it on board and became burdened by some self-concept that others were projecting onto them. This is particularly more likely to happen if you live in an ashram and you're surrounded only by people who think you are the greatest. Then it's very easy to slip into that and start to believe in some concept of who you are,
right,
which immediately obscures the power of spirit.
Yeah, it's so true. I'm sure you know who Rabindranath Tagore, the great Indian poet, who won the Nobel Prize back in the 1920s. He talked about the ego. He had this great observation poetically. He said, I went out alone on my way to my tryst. But who is this me in the dark? I step aside to avoid his presence, but I escape him not. He makes the dust rise from the earth with his swagger. He adds his loud voice to every word I utter. He is my own little self, my Lord. He knows no shame. But I am ashamed to come to thy door in his company.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's
Beautiful.
Tagore, that's the ego, yeah. That's for Tagore.
And I mentioned briefly yesterday with Ram Dass, I'm sure you can recognize it perhaps in your own experience, but it might be helpful for some of you. When let's say, just take a moment of coming here in the car from where we are staying to here to have this dialogue. At any moment, you can be either more a form identity, in which case your mind functions through your history, your concepts of who you are that others have told you and you believe, and you have created that mental self. And at any moment you can be either dwell more in this form identity of who you are, my name, my history, my achievements, or my failures, they're all form identity, or you can be an essence identity, which is simply an aware presence, where you don't need to remember anything or think anything, just be that field of awareness. So the only way I can ever go to a talk, an important gathering, if I travel as spiritual teacher number 1 going to meet spiritual teacher number 3, it would create immediate stress. Because I would be carrying that a conceptual self, a dreadful burden. But if I can be free of a conceptual self and be simply a presence, just an innocent, aware presence, and as I say it now, perhaps each one of you can at this very moment find that within you, you can be either a person or you can be an aware presence, and then at this moment. And the aware presence is alive. Beauty is not bigger than, smaller than, more important than, but it's powerful, but not more powerful than. It's power itself. And there's no unease in it because it competes with nothing. And so sometimes when I give, let's say I give a talk or there's a gathering or retreat, I'm 100% kind of presence. The person isn't really there. And then in everyday life, perhaps it's hard to quantify, but I might be 30% person, 70% consciousness. It's a coming together of form and formlessness in
But
daily life.
do you find when you're in that higher place where you're like 100% often in a meditation or wherever, but if you even if you leave the meditation and you just, like I was talking to you, what happened with that surgery and so on, and with this, my body just changing, and everything I look at and everyone that I look at is just so, I'm just so astonished and so bewildered and basically just feeling so loved. Do you find personally, Eckhart, that that your opportunity to serve literally strangers, whatever, I mean, people, you almost like see opportunities to be God, to, you know, I mean, how do you define, I mean, I always use the poets because I do a lot of poetry myself. Hafiz said, even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Just think what a love like that can do. It lights up the whole world. And I have found that people who are needing something that I have to give them keep showing up, and it's such a joy to give away, to serve, whether it's advice, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's clothes, whatever it might be. I mean, does that happen for you?
Yes, all the time. That's, I can see, by the way, in your eyes, we met for the first time, was it 10 years ago at Omega?
Right.
Very briefly, and you were a lovely being then, but now I can see perhaps the physical challenge that you are facing perhaps did that. It eroded your ego, and there's in your eyes there's a wonderful this love and tenderness, and I believe the grace that came through the illness, that came into your life through that.
I can't tell you how many sick people that I've been able to help that have just sort of shown up for me. And when I just did this television special, which will air all over, all over the world for years and years, and it feels like such a, even just to be here and to see these faces and to know that out there that people are going to be touched by. I mean, we got a world full of cancer, we got a world, and it's almost all from fear. I mean, and the Course says always, there's only fear and love, and everything that is fear cannot be love, and everything that is love cannot be fear. So you get your choice, and it seems to me we're talking about sending fear out of our lives and judgment, and, in the I Am discourses it says that if you can remove judgment, criticism, and condemnation towards any of God's children, I believe that means the planet as well, then that's when you will be able to manifest for yourself the life that you desire. As soon as you can rid yourself of those three things, judgment, criticism, condemnation. Yeah.
Yes, which are all thought forms.
Right.
That in itself would be enough. But of course, the deeper implication of that is that you can remove yourself from identification with those thought forms, and so you can be the awareness rather than the thought form. Otherwise, if you say, I mustn't judge, you can still be stuck in the mind. I must love my neighbor as myself. No, you have to step out of the thought form so that you can be present with your neighbor. Give your neighbor means anybody, give your neighbor complete and full spacious attention, and that's the love arises out of that. So it's not traditionally Christians, perhaps because they didn't understand the original message of Jesus deeply enough, you tried to be loving on the level of thought forms, but you can't. You have to step out of the thought forms that create the condemnation and the criticism and be the awareness underneath it. And then you meet the other in that field of awareness. And in that field of awareness, you are joined with every human. You feel the oneness, because the separation is created by believing in every concept. That every concept is a little barrier. Judgment, condemnations are big ones.
Right. What do you say to? I mean, I get this a lot. I'm sure you do as well. To all the bad things that are happening to good people. I mean, the accidents, the illnesses, the economy. I mean, all of the things that people are so filled with fear, which to me is creating an awful lot of unnecessary illness in our society.
Yes, a big challenge is coming. Some challenges come on an individual level, and sometimes in certain time periods there are large numbers of people who are facing similar challenges in a country or a group of countries. And life is not even meant to be free of challenges. The challenges have a purpose. Many of them, of course, are produced by the egoic consciousness, but if you look at it from a highest perspective, even the egoic consciousness that produces the suffering and the dysfunction on the planet, collectively and in individual lives, even that ultimately has its place in the transition to a higher state of consciousness, because eventually the ego creates so much suffering and challenges that it self-destructs. It awakens you because you can't stand the suffering anymore. That happened to me.
So much of the suffering, though, seems to be around this whole thing about greed and money and the economy and the dysfunction that our world seems to be in at this time. That there seems to be almost like
it's a crisis moving towards a crisis point.
Right.
And I believe that's connected with the awakening of consciousness, because it's only through when the crisis is reached that a new level can be attained. I think that probably applies to every species, even on lower levels of development. For example, I believe there's some biologists who say that also, when they say that life started in the sea and at some point it moved onto land. I don't think any fish would voluntarily jump onto land and start crawling. It's just too hard. But if a fish if there's a huge area of water that suddenly shrinks over a long period of time, suddenly the fish is forced to move out onto land. And then at some other point, an animal is forced to develop wings and fly because a crisis has been reached. And then a leap happens to a different level of consciousness. In humans, it's consciousness. And that's where we are now, where the egoic consciousness is becoming more and more dysfunctional. Or compared to a caterpillar who is approaching the end of its lifespan as a caterpillar, when the crawling gets more and more difficult. Before it was okay, the caterpillar was a caterpillar, but now it's reaching the end of its lifespan and says, oh, I can't move anymore, this is terrible. But yes, because you are destined to come to an end, to metamorphose, into the butterfly. And so again, the egoic consciousness creates more and more havoc on the planet.
What about individually, though? I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about myself and what kinds of growth things that have taken place for me, and how quickly. I mean, I think we can speed up this evolutionary thing, especially within our own selves. I mean, for me, I can go to very specific moments in my life as I look back at them now from this age that I am now. I can look back to an event that happened in 1974 when I was sent to my father's grave. My father had walked out on us, abandoned us, put me in a series of foster homes and orphanages and so on up until I was 10 years of age. I grew up with rage inside, anger, just bitterness and so. And through a series of just unbelievably mystical, impossible to explain circumstances, I ended up at my father's grave. I didn't even know he was dead, and was sent there. And in one afternoon, the 27th of August in 1974, my whole life was transformed. And all I did was stand there on his grave. I had gone there to his grave to do something else on his grave, because I was just so filled. And every night I would dream about it. I would be filled with rage and so on. And when I got to his grave, something came over me. It was overwhelming. We've just done a film on this called My Greatest Teacher. Hay House is putting it out soon. But it was like, and I was told to go back and to forgive. And I just sat on his grave and I sobbed and sobbed. And I remember saying out loud, and I knew that something very magical, mysterious, mystical that I couldn't put my finger on was happening to me. And I said to this man I had never seen in my life, except for when I was just an infant, from this moment on, I send you love. I forgive you. I let go, you know. And Mark Twain said that when you forgive someone, you know, the forgiveness, he said, is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. And if you can send fragrance out from that rage and from that anger, and I walked away from that experience, I'll never forget it. I went back to New York. I was teaching at a university. I rented a car, went down to Florida, and I wrote a book called Your Erroneous Zones in 14 days, by hand, beginning to end. And today it's got like 55 million copies in 47 languages around the world. And my whole life, when I just practiced forgiveness. This thing with John of God, with this leukemia, when I first got it, I thought, I don't do cancer. You know, I help other people who have cancer. And it's been life transforming. And it happened, it's like it's the process, maybe it's because I'm getting older or whatever, just speed it up. And I went from much more ego to just pure love to everyone and everything I encounter. And my children will tell you, the people that are close to me in life will tell you that they say, my father has changed. He just loves everyone and everything and doesn't know how not to do that. And that happened, and I just wonder, what's going to happen this afternoon? It's like, how fast, do you know what I mean? It's like, I think we can, if we shifted even Christianity, if we shifted it off of I am the crucifixion and all of the suffering, all of the things that are wrong and all of the pain and all of the images of that, to what Jesus really said, which is I am, meaning God, the resurrection. I am the resurrected being. I don't know, I think we can all resurrect ourselves in a huge way.
But the crucifixion actually points to because crucifixion, resurrection arises out of the crucifixion. So
Right.
Crucifixion is the seemingly dreadful thing that happens to a human being. It was, in your case, being abandoned as a child, being put in foster homes, or the illness now, the seemingly dreadful thing that actually grace is hiding there. The moment you come to a place of acceptance, as you did with the forgiveness, and as you did again with the illness, then the grace, and that's the resurrection. The crucifixion is the abandonment, the crucifixion is the illness, and the surrender, and then the peace that comes, and the connectedness with the source that comes then, that's the grace that is hiding there in every moment when dreadful things seem to happen.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to address. Thank you.
Thank you.